Hello, welcome to Postcolonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and what follows is an excerpted clip from one of my longer webinars. So what I've decided is that sometimes when people ask really interesting questions, I will pull out that particular part of a webinar and make it available to you as a short clip so that if you don't have time to watch a 1-hour webinar, you can at least watch and listen to the brief exchanges that I usually have with people who attend my webinars. So here is one such clip from a recent webinar. I hope you enjoy it. And then what is the danger of believing in this teleological movement of progress? If postcolonialism is a progress of theory, at what cost, right? What is being forgotten and what is not being taken into account? These are some of her critiques in 1991. The question for us now is, has postcolonialism as a field complicated this picture? Has it been broadened, right, in any way? I would say yes. I mean, we have come a long way from that, right? From that way of thinking. But do keep in mind that people who are opposed to postcolonial studies, maybe for not such deep philosophical reasons, but simply just because they don't like people like me in the academy constantly, because we are also sadly placed in the English departments, right? So English departments tend to be deeply conservative about the canon. And here are we coming along and basically suggesting that we shouldn't even be an English department. We should be a department of literature in English, and challenging the very assumptions of modernism and Shakespeare and all that. So this is something that people like that often mobilize to beat us over our head, that, oh, this is what you do, and we have to point to them that, hey, guys, this is 1991. The field hasn't even emerged yet. We have people who do all these kind of disparate things and account for American imperialism and, British imperialism, but also internal colonialisms. And we have scholars who talk about women's rights and gender and how do they figure in the post-colonial nation states. So, but as an early debate, this was a very instructive debate, as the field of post-colonial studies was emerging in the American Academy. One other thing that you can really use this essay good for, and it has really great research, is just the amount of statistical detail that she gives you about the US aggressions in South America, elsewhere in the world, and also just the activities, post-war activities. What was the cost of US order, right, in the world? How was it enforced through World Bank, through IMF? There is a great a few passages about the debt trap of African nations as well as the Asian nations. And as we progress forward, as we add more materials, since part of my own specialization is neoliberalism and globalization, we'll bring in a couple of theorists from that also who talk about these post-colonial issues. But while you're coming up with your questions, I would like to talk about what she talks about, the order, the economic order that America launches. Right now, it was in competition with another order, which was the Soviet Union system, but both were in one way or the other economic systems, right? By 1991, Soviet Union is defeated and capitalism in a way is triumphant. And she refers to the Francis Fukuyama book, which was a huge book when it came out, because it was called End of History. According to Fukuyama, history had ended and its end was capitalism and liberal democracy. And now we have seen that even Fukuyama agreed that was kind of true triumphant at that time. And his tone was true triumphal. But that was the moment when this is being written. This is like the most significant moment in the world history. Suddenly, after the invasion of Iraq, right? what she's calling the second Gulf War. We call it the first Gulf War, right? Is when one order has emerged as the dominant order, and that is the capitalistic system. And when it emerges, what kind of a world is created? Like the World Bank initiatives that she talks about, all these developmental initiatives which are poisonous and destructive to the environment, right? Now, in hindsight, we know that they were destructive, right? But at that time, progress was being offered, and progress in that sense, as Walter Benjamin sees, is that it unleashes its own destructions, and maybe it is inevitable, right? Now, in hindsight, we realize that no, development can be done in a different way. But think of it this way, the developing nations, which we call the post-colonial nations, they are still caught in this debt trap, which they went in 1970. And if you look at the budget of every nation, other than the dominant 7 or 8 nations, the first line on their budget is always debt servicing. This is the interest that they need to pay to IMF. That's the kind of world in which we live in. That majority of the populations of the world are working, paying their taxes so their governments can pay a huge sum every year to IMF in interest, not in principal payment. And so where does that money go? To the most developed part of the world, which doesn't even need it. So this clientele, this comprador status is not an accident. It's maintained through policies, right? Through global dictates. I mean, think of the IMF's power, right? It can make or break a nation. If they withhold their loan to you, not only is that you will run out of cash, your economy will be destroyed, because the moment IMF says we are not renewing your loan, your debts are due, your market will crash, right? You will lose your credit lines in the world. How does a government work, right? And when you lose your credit lines, no, you can't do trade with anyone. If you don't have foreign reserves, you can't even buy things that people take for granted from the world, right? So since the global economy is so integrated and depends on your foreign exchange reserves and your access to credit, the moment that is threatened, the country collapses. It doesn't matter how hardworking those people are, right? That is the system that she is talking about. That is the So as scholars of post-colonialism, we can't just talk about this poem is radical and it challenges the hierarchy. No, we need to understand how the world works, right? And I'm happy to report that a lot of us who do post-colonial studies, absolutely, if we don't know how the world works, we are constantly looking for how the world works, right? And we have come a long way from there. The question of women, that is immensely important. And it has been answered by people like Laila Abu Lugad, Chandra Mohanty, Mariam Cook, all these other people. But there is something that happens in the colonial fight. In most of the times, unless they were Marxists, then they were talking about at least a modern capitalistic movement of mobilizing the people. The movements, anti-colonial movements, mostly relied on pre-colonial historical narratives to articulate who they were. And that reinstituted the gender hierarchies, right? And when the nation becomes independent, those gender hierarchies that were mobilized to retrieve a past culture then become the defining instances of it. So think of countries like Algeria, countries like Pakistan, right? Algerians, of course, fought hard and lost millions of people, right? Women were active participants in that fight. But after the independence, figure of the woman became this sacred woman who must wear hijab and all that. So women are then reinscribed into the private sphere. In Pakistan, we are constantly trying to do that. So sometimes post-colonialism becomes this tool for the powerful patriarchies, because if we are going to jettison everything Western, we must then go and retrieve something that we can call our own. Then people who have the discursive power and material power go and retrieve the most conservative gender divides, right? And then as a result, we end up creating either non-democratic countries because we are retrieving a tradition which was undemocratic, right, and valorizing it. And the writ of reactionary power is always written on the bodies of women, right? Because the breaking point of the world of modernity was when women enter the public sphere as equals, right? So that then becomes a fight within the post-colonial nation states. My point is, at this point, post-colonialism is part of that fight. The scholars who do post-colonial studies will challenge the gender hierarchies, will talk about it, will write about it, and will work towards taking whatever is redeemable from the West and nativizing it, but also fighting against any form of blatant nativism. So these are some of the things that the field itself has already, emerged in the field and are established in the field. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this brief clip. If you are interested in the longer version, the link will be in the description and you can watch the whole webinar. Thank you so much for your support. And as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, you can always post them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If you have a moment and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now so that you get timely notifications of whatever is happening on this channel. Thank you for your support. Stay safe, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.